That flag comes down by Friday, or the fines start, and they do not stop. That was Charlotte Ames, standing on my gravel with her clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield, telling a man twice her age what he could and could not fly over his own roofline. She had on a magenta blazer and white sneakers that had never seen a real driveway. And she said it the way people say things when they have never once been told no. I let her finish. Then I told her the pole had been set in 1971 by my father, who poured the footing himself, and that the flag had flown over that footing longer than her subdivision had a name. She wrote something down. She did not look up when she did it. What she did not know, standing there, counting the days until her first fine, was that the permits her whole pretty development ran on carried my seal. At the bottom of every page, my stamp, my signature, the flat little embossed circle that says a licensed land surveyor walked that ground and certified it was what the paper claimed. She had spent 6 months trying to make me feel small on land I had measured before she ever saw it. She had no idea the foundation under her authority had my name pressed into it. So let me ask you something, and be honest. If a stranger in borrowed authority stood on the dirt your father bled into and told you your father's flag was a violation, what would you have done? I want you to hold that question while I tell you the rest, because the answer matters less than what you do with it afterward. My name is Hollis Vance. I am 61 years old. I have been a licensed land surveyor for 34 of those years, and before that I held the rod for my father, who held it for his. I own 11 acres on the south rim of Cedar Hollow, in a county most maps spell wrong. And the house I live in is the house I was carried home to as a baby. The flagpole stands 40 feet off the porch, set in a footing 2 feet deep and a foot across, and my father set it the summer the river flooded, because he said a man should have something that stays up when everything else is trying to wash down. The flag itself was nothing fancy. Cotton, hand-sized stars, hemmed at the edges by my late wife Nora, the winter before she passed. She had said the old one was getting thin, and she did not want the neighbors thinking we had let things go. Nora cared about how things looked. I cared about how things held. Between the two of us, the place stayed square and decent for 40 years, and after she was gone, I kept flying her flag because lowering it felt like agreeing she was gone, and I was not ready to agree to that. I remember her at the kitchen table with that flag spread across her lap, reading glasses down on her nose, a spool of heavy thread, and the good scissors she kept hidden from me because I borrowed them for things scissors are not meant for. She turned the hem twice and ran it slow, and she told me, "A hem run once will fray, and a hem run twice will hold." And I told her that was true of a great many things, and she told me not to get philosophical while she was sewing. She finished it the week before. The cold took a turn we did not come back from. That is the flag they wanted down by Friday. They did not know any of that, and I did not tell them, because a man does not hand his grief to people who would only measure it. The trouble did not come from the land. The land had been here the whole time. The trouble came from a fence line that was never mine to begin with. 12 years back, a developer bought the old Hadley pasture that ran along my north edge and turned it into Cedar Hollow Estates, 90-some lots, with curving streets and a stone entrance sign lit up at night. I had no quarrel with it. Growth comes. People need houses. What most of those new owners never learned, because nobody tells you the unglamorous parts when you buy a lot, was that the man who surveyed and platted their entire subdivision, who set the corners and shot the elevations and certified the drainage, was the old fellow living on the 11 acres they all looked down on from their back decks. That was me. I had done the work years before, hired by the developer, paid by the developer, and I had done it clean because I do not know how to do it any other way. That detail sat quiet for a decade. Then, the Homeowners Association decided I was a problem. It started small, the way these things always do. A letter, the first spring after Charlotte Ames took over the board. My 11 acres are not in their association. I never signed a covenant, never bought a lot, never agreed to a single rule. My deed predates their entire plat by 3 generations. None of that stopped the letter. It informed me that my property, quote, presented an aesthetic inconsistency with the community standard, and that the board would, quote, appreciate my cooperation in bringing the parcel into visual harmony. I did not answer, you do not answer noise. The second letter came at the start of summer. It named the flag specifically. It cited a covenant article governing, quote, the dimension and display of personal banners, and it set a maximum size that my flag exceeded by a few inches. I measured the flag to be sure. They were right about the inches and wrong about everything that mattered, which was that their covenant did not reach my dirt. I filed that one too. The day she came in person was a weekday in high July, hot enough that the gravel ticked. I was on the porch with a coffee that had gone cold and my dog, Biscuit, a heavy old blue heeler with a white blaze and one bad hip, asleep across my boots. A white SUV came up my drive too fast, stopped crooked, and Charlotte Ames got out with the clipboard. That was when she told me the flag came down by Friday, or the fine started and did not stop. I want to be fair to her, because the lesson at the end of this only works if she was a person and not a cartoon. Charlotte Ames believed she was right. She believed the way a person believes who has never had to check. She had a binder of covenants, a board that voted how she pointed, and a developer's old marketing language in her head about community and standards and property values. And somewhere in there, she had decided that my father's flag lowered everyone's home price by some number she could feel but never name. She was not cruel. She was incurious. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole story. The first fine arrived the following Monday. $50. The notice said it would compound weekly until compliance. I set it in a folder I labeled with one word, the name of the subdivision, and I started a log. Date received, amount, the covenant article cited. That folder is the spine of everything that came after, so remember it. I did one thing that first week, and it was not a phone call to a lawyer. I drove to the county building and pulled the recorded plat for Cedar Hollow Estates, the official one, the version that governs every lot, line and easement in that subdivision. I already knew what I would find. I wanted to hold it in my hands anyway. There it was, in the bottom right corner of every sheet, the surveyor's certification block. My seal, my signature, dated. The language that says I, the undersigned, certify that this plat correctly represents a survey made under my direction. I had signed it the year my daughter Tess started middle school. The ink had faded, the fact had not. I made a clean copy and put it in the folder behind the fines. Then I went home and let them keep sending paper. The fines climbed the way Charlotte promised. 50 became 100. 100 became 250 when they added a second violation, the height of my mailbox, which had stood at the same height since the Carter administration. By the end of summer, the running total they claimed I owed had crossed $2,000. None of it owed, all of it logged. Every notice came certified, which meant I had to drive to the post office and sign for the privilege of being told my father's footing offended the neighborhood. I signed every time I wanted the record to show I received it. I wanted nothing in that file. to have a hole in it. The woman behind the post office counter, Donna, who had sorted mail in that town for 30 years, started to know what the green and white certified slips meant before I reached the window. The first few times she slid them across without a word. By August, she would hold the clipboard for my signature and say, "Lo, them again," and shake her head, and I would say, "Them again," and sign, and we would leave it there. There is a particular tiredness that comes from being made into a problem you did not ask to be. And Donna saw it on me, and never once made me explain it. I kept the slips in order by date, paper-clipped to the notice, each one delivered, the whole stack growing in the folder, like rings in a stump. I read each notice all the way through before I filed it, not because I expected it to say anything new, but because a careful man reads what is put in front of him. The language never changed much. Community standard. Aesthetic harmony. Continued non-compliance. They had a template, and they filled in the blanks, and the blanks were my father's flag and my mailbox, and, in September, the color of the gravel on my own drive, which they decided was the wrong kind of stone. I measured nothing. They accused me of without writing the true number down beside their claim. The gravel notice I did not even dignify with a measurement. I just filed it. A man can only answer so much foolishness with a tape, and gravel is gravel. Here is where most people would have lawyered up loud, fired off a letter on letterhead, made noise to match her noise. I did not. I want to tell you why, because it matters more than the trick at the end. Noise gives the other side something to push against. Silence and a clean file give them nothing, and an antagonist with nothing to push against eventually pushes too far. So I stayed quiet, and I let Charlotte Ames build my case for me. One certified letter at a time, she did not disappoint. In September, the harassment got hands. A man named Greer Dunlap, the board's so-called compliance officer, started coming around. Greer wore a polo with the association crest stitched on the chest and carried a clipboard of his own and a tape measure he liked to snap open like it meant something. He had bought a fake badge somewhere, a gold-colored shield clipped to his belt that said nothing real, and he wore it the way a boy wears a sheriff costume. The first time he stepped onto my land, I watched him from the porch and let him get all the way to the flagpole before I spoke. "You are standing on private property that is not in your association," I said. "There is the road. Use it." He told me he was documenting the violation for the file. He said the word file, like he had invented it. I told him I had a file too, and that his face was now in it, and that he should think hard about whether he wanted to be a name in a record he could not see the bottom of. He left. He came back twice more that month, each time staying on the public road and photographing my flag with his phone, which was his right. And each time I wrote down the date and the time in the folder, which was mine. The thing that turned it from a nuisance into something with teeth happened on a Thursday in October, and it involved my daughter. Tess was 19 by then, home from her first year of school, working the counter at the feed store in town to save for the fall semester. She drove my late wife's old sedan, the one with Nora's hand cream still in the console. That Thursday, she came up the drive shaking. Greer Dunlap had followed her from the feed store. Not close, not touching. Just behind her the whole 8 miles, and when she turned up our road, he slowed and idled at the mouth of the drive and watched the car go up. She had locked the doors. She had called me from the parking lot in town with her voice coming apart, the way a frightened person talks, in pieces. "Dad, the HOA guy, he is. He pulled out when I pulled out. He is behind me. I do not. Should I keep driving? Dad." I stayed on the phone the whole way home. I told her to keep both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road and to come straight up the drive and not stop for anyone. I kept my voice level, because a level voice travels down a phone line and steadies the person holding the other end, and I needed her steady more than I needed to feel my own anger. She made it up the drive. Greer idled at the bottom for a slow 10 count and then drove off. I watched his taillights from the porch and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. I did not call him names. I did not drive down there. I wrote it down. Date, time, what she reported, the 8 miles, the idling at the mouth of the drive. And the next morning, for the first time in the whole affair, I made a phone call that was not to the county records office. I called the sheriff's department, and I asked them to send a deputy out so I could file a report, on the record, with a case number about a board officer following a teenage girl home. The deputy who came was named Ortega, maybe 40. Careful. The kind of officer who writes everything down and promises nothing. He parked his cruiser at the top of the drive and walked the last stretch on foot, hat in his hand, and he wiped his boots on the porch mat before he came in, which told me something about him. He sat at the kitchen table where Nora used to roll out pie dough, and he set a small notebook in front of him and clicked his pen and waited. He listened to Tess tell it in her own words. She told it the way it had happened, not the way it would sound best, stopping twice to get the order of things right. And Ortega did not rush her. He asked her quiet questions. What did the vehicle look like? Where exactly did it pull out behind her? Did it ever close the distance? Did she recognize the driver? And she said she did, that it was the man in the polo who measured things, and Ortega wrote that down too. Then he listened to me, lay it out flat, with no editorializing, and he took down the dates from my folder, copying them into his notebook in a square, patient hand. He told me, fairly, that following someone on a public road was a hard thing to charge, unless it escalated. He was not brushing me off. He was telling me the truth about the tools he had, which is what an honest officer does instead of a promise. I told him I understood. I was not asking him to charge anyone. I was asking him to put it in the record, with a number, so that if it ever did escalate, the record would already be there. He looked at me a moment when I said that. The way a man looks at another man who is speaking his own language back to him. He looked at my folder then. The fines, the log, the certified slips. The copy of the plat with the certification block, and something shifted in his face. He turned a few pages and stopped on the plat and read the block at the bottom, and he looked up at me, and he looked back down, and he did not say what he was thinking, but I watched him reconsider who was sitting across the table from him. He told me to call him directly if Dunlap came back, and he wrote a case number on a card and slid it across the dough-marked table. And he told Tess gently that she had done everything exactly right, that locking the doors and calling and driving straight home. And I watched my daughter sit up a quarter-inch under a uniformed man, telling her she had not done anything wrong. That mattered more to me that week than the case number did. That was the first time someone in a uniform stood on my side of the fence. It was not the last. You would think a sensible board, learning that one of its officers had frightened a young woman badly enough that the sheriff was now involved, would pull back. Charlotte Ames did the opposite. 2 weeks after the deputy's visit, the association escalated to the part they had been building toward all along. They filed a lien. The lien claimed I owed the Homeowners Association $4,800 in accumulated fines, and this is the part that finally told me what the whole thing had really been about, a special assessment for, quote, the parcel's pro rata share of community infrastructure improvements. There it was. the money. Behind the flag, and the mailbox and the aesthetic harmony, there was always the money. Charlotte Ames was not defending a property value. She was trying to attach my 11 acres to her association's books, to make my unencumbered 3-generation deed liable for the cost of their roads and their drainage and their light-up stone sign, as if I had ever been one of them. And here is the part that should have made her check the record before she filed. The infrastructure improvement she wanted me to help pay for was a road extension. The board had voted that summer to push a new connector street through the back of the subdivision, across a strip of ground to a future phase of lots the developer's successor wanted to build. It was the big project, the one the special assessment was funding, the one Greer Dunlap kept measuring my flag instead of looking at. They had broken ground in August. There was an excavator parked back there behind orange fence, idle on weekends, chewing toward my north line. That connector road crossed an easement, and the easement, like the plat, like the lots, like the whole development, had been certified by me. I knew because I had set it. Years back, when I platted Cedar Hollow Estates, the developer wanted future access to that back parcel. So I surveyed and described a 30-foot access and utility easement running across the rear of the subdivision. The legal description of that easement, the metes and bounds that say exactly where it may and may not go, terminated at a point I had set on the original Hadley parcel line, and the back parcel the new board wanted to reach had, in the years since, been split. The piece of ground the connector road actually had to cross to reach the new phase was not inside the recorded easement at all. It was a corner of my 11 acres. My deed. The easement stopped 61 feet short of where they needed it, and only the man who set the point 61 feet back knew it without digging. They were about to build a public road through private land they did not own, funded by a lien on the very land they were trespassing. And the only document that could prove exactly where the line fell carried my seal. I sat with that for a long night. Biscuit put his head on my knee, and I scratched his ears. And I thought about Nora hemming that flag with her reading glasses down on her nose. And I thought about my father, with his shovel, 1971. And I made a decision that was not about revenge, whatever it might look like from the outside. It was about boundaries. What a surveyor spends his whole life on one idea, that a line is a line, that it is where it is and not where anyone wishes it were, and that the wishing of a powerful person does not move a monument set in the ground. I had spent 34 years defending that idea for other people. It was time to defend it for my father's flag. I did not go to Charlotte Ames. I went to the county. I want to be careful about how I tell this next part, because it would be easy to make it sound like I sat back and sprang a trap. That is not what happened, and the difference is the whole lesson. I did not hide what I knew and wait to humiliate her. I tried, first in good faith, to stop her from making a mistake she could not undo. I wrote the board one letter, the only letter I sent in the whole affair, plain and short. I told them that the connector road, as staked, would cross private property outside any recorded easement, that the property was mine and that I was the surveyor of record for their plat. I told them to stop work and verify their alignment before they cut another foot. I sent it certified because by then I had learned their language. Charlotte Ames answered it the way incurious people answer inconvenient facts. She did not verify. She doubled down. The board's attorney sent a one-page reply informing me that the association's engineer had reviewed the alignment and found it, quote, well within the platted easement, and that my, quote, attempt to obstruct a duly authorized community improvement would be noted. They added the cost of their attorney's letter to my lien. So they had been warned, in writing, by the man whose seal was on their plat, and they had chosen not to check. Remember that, because it is why what came next was fair. I made an appointment with the county engineer's office and the public works department, the people who actually have to accept a new public road before anyone can drive on it. I brought my folder. I brought the recorded plat with my certification block. I brought the original easement description, the meets and bounds, and I brought my field book from the year I set the point, the same waterproof book my father taught me to keep, where the coordinates of every monument I had ever set were written in pencil that does not fade. And I laid it all out for a young engineer named Sal Voss, who had inherited the county's review of the connector road, and had been told it was routine. Sal Voss was maybe 35, sleeves rolled, the office around him stacked with rolled drawings and cardboard tubes. And when I first sat down across from his desk, he had the patient, slightly braced look of a man expecting a citizen. That look changed about 90 seconds in. He read the easement description. He read it the way someone reads who actually understands what meets and bounds are, his finger moving call by call, bearing by bearing, distance by distance. Mouthing the terminal point under his breath, he read the plat. He looked at the construction drawings the board's hired engineer had submitted, the ones that showed the road comfortably inside the easement, and he frowned at them, and I could see him beginning to feel the gap between the two documents before he could name it. Then he looked at my field book. I had it open to the page from the year my daughter started middle school, the coordinates of the terminal monument in pencil, the little sketch beside them my father taught me to draw, a north arrow, the iron pin, the fence corner I had tied it to. Sal Voss got very quiet. He looked at the page a long moment. Then he turned to his screen and pulled up the county's own mapping system, and he typed in the coordinate from my book by hand, and a point dropped onto the map, and he laid the construction alignment over the recorded easement, and the road ran off the end of the easement and onto a parcel the map labeled with my name. 61 feet, he measured it on the screen, the little ruler tool stretching across the gap. He measured it twice. The second time he said a word under his breath that I will not repeat, and then he sat back in his chair and said, out loud to no one, "This road does not have anywhere to go." I did not gloat. I did not even nod much. I had known what he would find before I walked in. The way you know a wall is plumb before you hang the level on it. What I felt was not triumph. It was the quiet relief of watching a careful man arrive at the same true number I had carried for 3 weeks, so that it was not just mine anymore. A fact that only one person holds as a worry. The man they had hired to engineer that road never surveyed the line. He had scaled it off the developer's old marketing map, the one with the curving streets, and he had assumed the easement reached the new phase because the picture made it look like it did. He never pulled the legal description. He never checked the terminal monument. He did exactly what Charlotte Ames did, on a larger scale, and with a license he should have respected better. He trusted the wish instead of the line. Sal Voss issued a stop work order on the connector road that same week. Not because I asked him to, because the law required it. A public road cannot be accepted across private property without a recorded easement or a purchase, and there was neither. The excavator behind the orange fence went silent and stayed silent. Now, I want to slow down because this is the part people get wrong about how these things actually end. It did not end with Charlotte Ames being humiliated in a parking lot. It ended in a room, in daylight, with witnesses, the way real consequences land. The county scheduled a hearing, because the association had a road half-graded to nowhere, and a special assessment collected to pay for it, and a lien filed against a parcel that turned out to be the one thing standing between them and a lawsuit. The hearing was public. The board came. Charlotte Ames came in a fresh blazer with her binder. Greer Dunlap came in his polo, without his fake badge, I noticed. A dozen homeowners came, the ones whose assessment money had paid for a road that could not be built, and they did not look at me like the man who flew the offensive flag. They looked at me like a man who might explain where their money had gone. I did not give a speech. I want you to hear that, because it is the heart of the lesson. When my turn came, I did not stand up and tell Charlotte Ames what I thought of her. I handed Sal Voss my field book and the recorded easement description, and I let him explain, in the flat voice of a public official, reading a fact into a record, where the line was. He put the recorded easement on the screen. He put the construction alignment on the screen. He showed the 61 feet. He read the certification block at the bottom of the plat, the one that said the survey had been made under the direction of the undersigned. And then he read the name in the block, and the name was mine. And the room turned and looked at the old man who flew the flag. Charlotte Ames stood up. To her credit, she still thought she had a hand to play. She said the association had relied on its engineer in good faith. She said the easement had always been understood to reach the back parcel. She said the developer had promised access. She was not lying. She believed all of it. And Sal Voss, who was a kinder man than I would have been in his chair, told her gently that an understanding is not an easement, that a promise is not a recorded instrument, and that the line was where the monument said it was. Then he asked her the question that ended it. He asked whether the association's engineer had pulled the recorded legal description before staking the road. The board's attorney leaned to her and whispered, and she did not answer, and her silence was the answer. That was the humbling, not a shout, a question she could not answer in a room full of the people she answered to. I watched it land, because I am being honest with you, and I did watch. Charlotte Ames stood there with her binder against her chest, the same way she had stood on my gravel in July. And the binder did not help her this time. Her mouth opened and closed once. She looked at her attorney, and her attorney looked at the table. She looked at the board members beside her, and they had already begun the small physical work of separating themselves from her, the half-inch of leaning away that people do when they have decided not to go down with someone. She looked, last, at the homeowners in the folding chairs, the ones who had paid the assessment, and they were not angry at her in the loud way. They were worse than angry. They were embarrassed to have followed her. I have seen a lot of authority come apart over 34 years of standing in county rooms, and it never comes apart in a crash. It comes apart in a quiet like that one, the quiet of a person realizing the floor they were standing on was a picture of a floor. I did not enjoy it the way I might have told you back in July that I would. So, I had thought, those first certified weeks, that I wanted to see her made small. Sitting in that room, I found I only wanted the line put right and my daughter able to drive home in peace, and both of those were happening, and the smallness of Charlotte Ames was just the weather that came with them, not the thing I had come for. The consequences came in order, the way consequences do when the documentation is clean. The county voided the road acceptance. With no road, the special assessment had funded nothing, and the homeowners who had paid it wanted it back, which meant the board that had collected it under Charlotte Ames was now answering to its own members instead of bullying its neighbors. The lien against my property came apart the moment a county engineer put on the record that the parcel it encumbered was never in the association, and that the association had been about to trespass across it. The board's own attorney, the one who had added his letter to my fictional bill, advised them in writing to release the lien and withdraw every fine, which they did within the month. All of it, the flag, the mailbox, the special assessment, gone, because none of it had ever reached my dirt, and now there was a county record saying so in plain language. Charlotte Ames did not go to jail. This is not that kind of story, and I would not have wanted it to be. She lost the thing she had actually been protecting. It was her authority. The board called a special meeting that fall, and the homeowners, the same ones who had once nodded along when she called my flag, an inconsistency, voted her out, along with the 2 members who had backed the road and the lien. They were not cruel about it. They were just done trusting someone who had spent their money on a road to nowhere and aimed the law at a neighbor without once checking whether the law was on her side. Greer Dunlap resigned before they could ask him to. The fake badge, I am told, did not come up. I will tell you the one moment from those weeks that I keep, because it was small and it was the realest thing in the whole affair. About 10 days after the hearing, a knock came on my door, soft, mid-morning, and it was one of the homeowners from Cedar Hollow Estates, a man named Earl, who lived in the 3rd house down with a view of my flag from his back deck. He stood on my porch turning a ball cap in his hands, and he said he wanted to apologize. He said he had voted to send me that first letter. He said he had believed Charlotte when she stood up at the meeting and called my place an inconsistency, that he had never once thought to ask whether her covenant even reached my land, and that learning it had not. Learning the whole time the man they were fining had drawn the lines their own houses sat on, had kept him up 2 nights. I told him to put his hat back on. It was cold, and that a man who comes to say he was wrong is already most of the way to right. We shook hands on the porch. Biscuit leaned on his leg the way he does, with people he has decided are all right. Earl looked up at the flag, at Nora's hem catching the wind, and he said it looked just fine to him, and he went home. I have thought about Earl more than about Charlotte Ames in the time since. The neighbor who follows along is never the enemy. He was just a man who had not pulled the deed, and the day he did, he came and said so. The matter of him following Tess did not vanish into the civil mess either. Deputy Ortega's report, the one with the case number I had insisted on back when nothing seemed to be happening, sat in the file the whole time. When the board collapsed and Dunlap's conduct came up at the special meeting, 2 other young women from the subdivision said quietly that he had done the same thing to them, idled outside their work, photographed them under the cover of his clipboard. With the case number already on record, the sheriff had somewhere to start. Dunlap was charged with stalking, not because I demanded it, because a record that exists is a record that can be found, and I had made sure ours existed on a morning when it felt like nothing would ever come of it. The lesson under the lesson is that you keep the record before you know you need it, because by the time you know, it is too late to have started. There was a night, after all of it had settled, that I want to leave you with, because the documents are not the point and never were. It was an evening in late fall, the light gone gold and low across the 11 acres. The new connector road abandoned behind its orange fence, with grass already coming up through the graded dirt. Tess was home for the weekend. She had stopped flinching when a car came up the drive. We stood out by the flagpole, the 2 of us and old Biscuit moving slow on his bad hip, and we lowered Nora's flag for the night, the way you are supposed to, folding it between us, her hands and mine, the cotton thin and soft from her mother's hemming. Tess held the corner her mother had sewn. I held the corner her grandfather's footing held up. The pole stood where my father said it the summer the river tried to take everything, and could not take that. I felt level, the way you feel when a thing you measured comes out true. The flag was just cloth. The footing was just concrete. The line under all of it, the one my father set and I certified and a county put on the record, that line held, because a line holds when someone keeps it. So here is the lesson, plain, the way I promised. You do not win these fights with anger, and you do not win them with a louder voice than theirs. You win them with a clean file and a true line. If someone with a clipboard and borrowed authority tells you your deed does not mean what it says, do not argue with them on your porch. Go pull your deed. Walk your boundaries. Find your corners and your monuments and know exactly where your line falls, because the wishing of a powerful person does not move a point set in the ground, but only if you can prove where the point is. Keep your records before you need them. Sign for every certified letter. Write down every date. File the report even when nothing seems to be happening, especially then. The county does not care how you feel. It cares what you can show. And the older, cleaner, recorded fact will outlast the newest, loudest claim every single time, but only for the owner who kept it. If this sat right with you, sit with it a minute before you scroll on, and if you have got your own line worth keeping, go find your corners this week before someone else decides where they are. I've got another one for you, about a woman 3 valleys over, who got a demolition notice for a barn that turned out to be older than the ordinance they cited and what she found in the county basement when she went looking for the date. That is a story for next time. Keep your file clean, walk your line, and I will see you down the road.